I still remember the laughter that night, that cruel, careless laughter that filled my own house. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, stood at the center of it, wearing the silk gown I had gifted her last Christmas. "Oh, Martha, you're such a darling," she said, her tone sugar-sweet, but her eyes glinting. "But maybe next time you could wear something less homely?" The room erupted in soft, polite giggles. My hands trembled around the glass I was holding. I had worn my best that evening, a floral dress, simple, but it was mine. My son Ethan didn't say a word. He just stared at his shoes, the same way he always did when Melissa belittled me. That night, I smiled through humiliation. I smiled when one of her friends whispered, "She's sweet, but she doesn't really fit the elegant crowd, does she?" I smiled when Ethan avoided my eyes. I smiled because if I didn't, I would cry. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always love hearing from people who understand how it feels when kindness is mistaken for weakness. When the guests finally left, the house smelled of perfume and money, expensive and empty. Melissa walked past me toward the stairs, her heels clicking against the marble. "You don't need to clean up tonight," she said lightly. "We've hired someone for that. Just don't touch the crystal." "It's very delicate." I stood there, speechless. The crystal she was talking about had been mine, a wedding gift from my late husband 40 years ago, after she disappeared upstairs. I sat at the table, surrounded by half-finished drinks and lipstick-stained napkins. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. I whispered to myself, maybe I don't belong here anymore. But something inside me stirred. A small, steady voice, the same one that got me through years of raising Ethan alone after his father died, whispered back, "Not yet." That night, I packed a few things in a small bag and left before dawn. I didn't slam any doors or write any notes. I simply left the house I had built with my own hands. Melissa probably woke up at 9, stretched in her silk robe, and assumed the unrefined old woman was somewhere in the kitchen making breakfast. She had no idea I was gone. I checked into a quiet little inn by the river, a place my husband and I used to visit when life was simpler. I rented a small room and told the owner, Mrs. Gray, that I needed a few days of peace. "You take all the time you need, dear," she said kindly. "You look like someone who's been holding her breath for too long." For the first time in months, I slept deeply. No clicking heels, no fake laughter, no careful words, just silence and the steady rhythm of the river outside. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise and walked along the water. The cold air bit my cheeks, but I felt alive, free. That's when I saw the news notification flash across my phone. Fire breaks out at Eastwood Mansion. Guests evacuated, damage estimated at $2.5 million. My heart stopped. Eastwood Mansion, Ethan and Melissa's house, my home. I dialed Ethan immediately. It rang 4 times before his shaky voice answered. "Mom? Oh, thank God. Are you okay?" "Of course I am," I said, confused. "What happened?" He took a deep breath. It was the kitchen. A candle or something. Melissa was hosting another dinner, and a soft sob broke his sentence. Then faintly, I heard another voice in the background. Melissa's crying. "Ethan, is she all right?" He hesitated. She's fine, but she wants to talk to you." I could hear her take the phone, her voice trembling, stripped of all the arrogance it once carried. "Martha, please, can I come see you?" I paused. "Why?" "Because everything's gone," she said between sobs. "The fire. The insurance. It's complicated. Ethan told me you're at the River Inn. Please, I need to see you." For a moment, I wanted to hang up. The part of me she had crushed, humiliated, dismissed, wanted her to feel every ounce of the pain she had caused. But something else, something motherly, wouldn't let me. "Come," I said quietly. "But don't expect sympathy." When I hung up, Mrs. Gray, who had been setting breakfast nearby, gave me a look. "Trouble following you, dear?" "Maybe," I said softly, "but this time I'm ready for it." By noon, Melissa's black car pulled up to the inn. She stepped out, her perfect hair tangled, mascara streaked across her cheeks. She looked like a woman who'd seen her reflection and didn't recognize it. When she saw me standing at the door, she broke down completely. "Martha, I'm so sorry," she cried, falling to her knees. "You were right. About everything." Her apology echoed across the quiet inn porch, but I didn't answer, not yet. I just looked at her, the woman who once called me unrefined, now on the ground, shaking and begging. It was in that moment I realized, elegance isn't about gowns or manners or the cut of your crystal. It's about grace when life strips you of everything, and for the first time, I didn't feel small in front of her. I felt powerful. Melissa's sobs echoed against the wooden walls of the inn, raw and desperate. For years, she had spoken to me with polished contempt. Now her words came out cracked and uneven, like glass under pressure. "I have nothing left, Martha," she whispered, looking up at me with swollen eyes. "The fire destroyed everything. Our savings, the furniture, the jewelry, all gone. I don't even have a dress to wear that isn't covered in soot." I stood there, arms crossed, my heartbeat steady. For the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to comfort anyone. I simply let the silence stretch. Finally, I said, "You built your world out of things that could burn." Melissa flinched, her lips trembling. I know I was awful to you. I said things I shouldn't have. She stopped, her throat tightening. I wanted people to think I was perfect. I wanted them to think our family was perfect. I gestured toward the bench by the window. "Sit, you need to breathe," she obeyed, wiping her tears. For a while, we both sat in silence, the faint sound of the river in the background filling the gaps between us. "Ethan's at the insurance office," she said after a pause. He's angry, but not at the fire, at himself. He says he never stood up for you, that he let me turn you into a stranger." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd long accepted that my son had changed, molded by the city, his marriage, his need to keep peace. Hearing that he finally saw it, that hurt more than all the dinners where he stayed quiet. I took a deep breath and said, "Melissa, you once told me I wasn't elegant enough for your guests." Her eyes filled again, this time with shame. "I remember. Well," I said softly, "those guests are gone now. The people who clapped at your jokes, who smiled when you mocked me, do any of them call you today?" She shook her head. "That's because people who admire your surface will vanish when it cracks," I said. "But those who love your soul, they stay even when everything else burns." Her lip quivered, and she whispered, "I don't think I have anyone like that left." I looked at her for a long time before answering, "Maybe you don't, but you could start becoming that kind of person yourself." She looked down, the tears returning. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But you deserve a chance to learn what real humility feels like." She nodded slowly. "Please, Martha, just let me stay here for a few days. I can't face anyone right now." I hesitated. Every instinct in me wanted to say no, to remind her of the years she treated me like an unwelcome guest in my own home. But when I saw the genuine fear in her eyes, I sighed. "There's a spare room upstairs," I said finally. "But you'll have to earn your stay. Mrs. Gray needs help in the kitchen." Her eyes widened. "You want me to work?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, dishes, floors, whatever needs doing. Consider it the start of your education in grace." For a moment, she just stared at me, disbelief and humiliation fighting in her expression. But then something broke inside her. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll do it." That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I watched her from the porch window. Melissa, the woman who once threw dinner parties for politicians and socialites, was now wearing an apron, scrubbing dishes beside Mrs. Gray. Her manicured hands were red from the hot water, her hair tied messily behind her head. It was a strange sight, but not a cruel one. There was something almost beautiful about it, a person finally stripped of pretense, learning what it meant to be real. When she came upstairs later that night, she paused at my door. "Martha," she said softly, "thank you for not turning me away." I looked up from my book. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because that's what your son would have wanted me to do." She nodded, guilt clouding her face, and whispered, "I'll make it right, somehow." When she left, I sat in silence, staring at the lamp's dim glow. I wasn't sure if I believed her, but a strange calm had settled inside me, the kind that comes when you finally realize you don't need revenge to win. The next morning, I walked to the bakery near the inn. The owner, a cheerful man named George, waved at me. "Morning, Mrs. Roberts. Haven't seen you here in a while." "Been busy rediscovering peace," I said with a small smile. He laughed. "That sounds better than anything I sell here." As I picked up a loaf of bread, I saw a familiar black car pull up outside. Ethan stepped out, looking older than his years, dark circles under his eyes. When he saw me, he froze. "Mom," he said, voice trembling. "I've been looking everywhere for you," I smiled gently. "Well, you found me." He ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for letting her treat you that way. For not speaking up." I set the bread down and took his hand. "Ethan, sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and sometimes it wounds deeper too." He looked away, ashamed. "I don't expect you to forgive us." "I already did," I said softly. "That's how I survived." He looked up, confused. "Then why didn't you come home?" I smiled sadly. "Because home isn't a place, Ethan. It's a feeling. And I lost that feeling in your house a long time ago." He nodded slowly, tears welling up. "Can I at least bring you back for dinner tonight? Just the three of us?" "Maybe," I said after a pause. "If she's truly ready to apologize, not with words, but with actions." Ethan and I walked together through the quiet morning streets. He didn't say much, just held the door open when I entered the bakery and carried the bread back to the car, as if trying to make up for years of indifference with small, silent gestures. I let him. Sometimes a person's guilt doesn't need words. It needs space to breathe. When we reached the house, I saw the damage the fire had left behind. The main hall was blackened, the air still faintly smelled of smoke and wet ash. Melissa was sitting on the porch steps, her face pale, her hair tied back like a child's. She rose when she saw me and quickly wiped her eyes. "Martha," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me stay at the inn. I started cleaning some of the rooms here too." I nodded slightly. "Good, keep your hands busy. It helps quiet the noise in your head." Ethan set the bread on the porch railing. "We'll rebuild," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It might take months, maybe a year, but we'll do it." Melissa looked at him helplessly. "We can't even afford new furniture, Ethan." "That's fine," I interrupted. "Furniture doesn't make a home. Love does, respect does. Maybe this fire wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was a chance to start from ashes with cleaner hearts." Melissa stared at me as if she'd never heard such a thing before. Her eyes softened. "You really think we can?" "If you mean it," I said simply. Later that afternoon, she asked if she could help me bake. It was a strange request from someone who once mocked me for using cheap flour, but I agreed. I showed her how to knead the dough with care, how to feel the texture change beneath her palms. She worked in silence for a long time, and when the loaves began to rise, she whispered, "It's like breathing again." I almost smiled. Bread teaches patience. If you rush it, it falls apart. That night, while the three of us sat at the small wooden table in the undamaged part of the house, Ethan poured tea and spoke hesitantly. "Mom, Melissa wants to say something." I looked at her and waited. She put her cup down carefully. "Martha, I was cruel. I let pride eat me alive. I wanted people to envy me so badly that I forgot how to be kind. I judged you because I thought being different meant being less. And I was wrong." The words came out slow, trembling, but they were real. I could see it in her eyes. "Do you remember that dinner party?" I asked quietly. "The one where you told me not to sit at the head of the table because elegance matters?" Her face went red. "Yes. I sat by the kitchen door that night," I continued, "and watched you pour wine for everyone else. Do you know what hurt most? It wasn't the insult. It was Ethan laughing along, pretending not to notice." Ethan lowered his head. "I was weak, I know," I said softly. "But weakness can heal if you face it. So can arrogance." Melissa's eyes filled again. "Will you forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. I took a sip of tea, felt the warmth steady my hands, and said, "Forgiveness isn't a gift I give. It's something you earn by living differently." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "Then I'll earn it." That night I stayed in my old guest room, the one they had turned into a storage space years ago. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the faint moonlight on the ceiling, wondering if people truly changed or if time only softened their edges. The next morning, I heard movement downstairs. Melissa was up early, sweeping the floors. Her movements were slow but deliberate, as though she wanted to sweep away not just the soot, but the past itself. Ethan joined her, fixing broken hinges, scrubbing walls. It was the first time I'd seen them work side by side without pretense or pride. I went to the porch and watched the sunrise spill over the charred fields. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet satisfaction of peace. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Melissa's voice tentative. "Martha, there's something else. Something I need to confess." I turned. Her hands were trembling, clutching the hem of her apron. "When you left after the wedding, Ethan didn't tell you the truth. I was the one who pushed for it. I told him you embarrassed us in front of our friends, that you didn't belong in that crowd. He didn't want to send you away, but I insisted. I thought it made me powerful." Her voice cracked. "When the fire started last night, all I could think about was that night. About how cruel I was. I thought maybe this was God's way of burning the person I used to be." I said nothing for a moment. The wind stirred the curtains. "Then take it as mercy," I said quietly. "Not punishment." Melissa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will, I promise." Behind her, Ethan stood silently, eyes glistening. "Mom, will you stay with us until we rebuild?" I looked between them, my son, my daughter-in-law, both stripped of their masks, both finally human again. "Yes," I said softly. "But this time it won't be as a guest. I'm coming home as family, and for the first time in a long time." That word, family, didn't sound broken. The following morning felt different. Lighter somehow, though the air still smelled faintly of smoke. The bakery had reopened its doors that day, just 2 streets away from the house. Melissa insisted on coming along, saying she wanted to help. I didn't refuse her. Words weren't enough anymore, and maybe work could teach her what apologies couldn't. When we entered the bakery, the bell above the door chimed, just like it had the day I opened it 30 years ago. I watched Melissa as she took in the walls, family photos, old recipes pinned near the counter, and a faded newspaper article about the bakery's 10th anniversary. "You built all this," she said softly. "I never realized how much heart this place had." "It's more than flour and sugar," I replied. "Every loaf here has a story baked into it." She smiled faintly. "Maybe you can teach me to bake one of those stories." The morning rush began soon after. Regular customers greeted me with warmth. Mrs. O'Donnell, who had been buying cinnamon rolls since Ethan was in high school, and old Mr. Perry, who still flirted shamelessly with every woman over 50. They glanced at Melissa curiously, but she met their eyes with humility instead of arrogance. I saw her offering pastries to the customers, wiping the counter without being asked, her expression calm and focused. It was strange. She didn't seem like the same woman who had once refused to let me touch her silk tablecloths. Around noon, the bell above the door rang again. This time, a tall woman in a black coat entered, her perfume sharp and elegant, the kind of scent that filled rooms at charity galas. "Melissa?" she said, surprised. "What on earth are you doing here?" Melissa froze. "Charlotte, I didn't expect to see you in an apron," Charlotte said, her tone laced with mockery. "Did your husband finally run out of money?" Melissa's eyes flickered with embarrassment, but she didn't lash out. "I'm learning something more important than money, Charlotte." Charlotte's smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" Melissa took a deep breath. Humility, gratitude, and how to bake a loaf of bread that means something. Charlotte blinked, speechless. I saw her discomfort grow as customers began to glance her way, sensing her condescension. "Well," she stammered, "that's admirable, I suppose." I smiled faintly and handed Charlotte a loaf wrapped in brown paper. "On the house," I said. "Sometimes life needs a bit of sweetness." Charlotte hesitated, took the bread, and left in silence. After she was gone, Melissa turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. "I used to want to be her so badly," she said. "Now I just want to be better," I nodded. "That's how you know you've grown." That evening, after we closed the bakery, Ethan arrived with takeout for all of us. He looked exhausted but peaceful, a man finally free of pretending. "You two look like you've had quite a day," he said. Melissa laughed softly. You could say that. We sat together in the small back room of the bakery, the same room where Ethan used to do his homework while I baked at dawn. The walls still smelled of yeast and vanilla, a comforting scent that wrapped around us like an old blanket. As we ate, Melissa looked up suddenly, her expression thoughtful. "Martha," she said quietly, "I want to rebuild that house exactly the way you like it. With the old wooden cabinets, the brick oven, even your herb garden in the back. If that's okay with you." I watched silently. Charlotte was one of those women Melissa used to chase approval from, the same crowd that laughed at me for wearing handmade clothes to their events. I paused, spoon halfway to my mouth. "Why?" "Because," she said, "you built this family, and I burned it down. The least I can do is help rebuild it right." Her honesty struck something deep in me. I saw sincerity in her eyes, the kind that couldn't be faked. I reached out and took her hand. "Then we'll build it together." That night, as I walked home under the starlit sky, I realized something I hadn't in years. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about giving people a chance to rise again. When I reached the porch, I saw a small box waiting near the door. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting. "For everything I took for granted. I'm Melissa." Beneath it lay a delicate gold bracelet, one I'd lost years ago after Ethan's wedding. I smiled softly. Maybe some things really do come full circle. And that night, for the first time since my husband passed, I slept with the quiet heart of someone who had finally made peace with her past. A week later, the house smelled like sawdust, paint, and second chances. The once cold marble floors were being replaced with warm wooden planks that creaked softly underfoot, just like they had decades ago. The sunlight that filtered through the half-hung curtains made the dust dance in golden spirals. And for the first time, the place felt alive again. Melissa stood in the kitchen, her hair tied up in a messy bun, an old sweatshirt dusted with flour. "You were right," she said, glancing at the new wooden cabinets. "This feels like home, not a museum." I smiled faintly. "Home is where you can spill a little flour and not apologize for it." Ethan laughed from behind us. He had been repairing the shelves himself, hammer in hand, sweat on his brow. I hadn't seen him this content in years. "Mom," he said, "Melissa actually burned a batch of cookies this morning." Melissa rolled her eyes, blushing. "They were experimental." "Charcoal cookies?" I teased. "That's a bold experiment." For a moment, the kitchen filled with laughter, light, real, and healing. It reminded me of the days when Ethan was a boy, sneaking spoonfuls of batter when he thought I wasn't looking. But just as the warmth settled in, I noticed something strange. A worker had uncovered a small metal box while removing the old flooring near the study. "Ma'am," he called, holding it up. "We found this under the floorboards." My heart skipped a beat. That part of the house hadn't been touched since before my husband passed away. Melissa wiped her hands and came closer. "What is it?" I took the box, brushing off the dust. The lock was rusted, but with a quick twist of a screwdriver, it popped open. Inside were a few yellowed papers, an old photograph, and a folded letter. Ethan leaned over my shoulder as I opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable, my husband's. "My dearest Martha," it began. "If you ever find this, it means time has caught up to me faster than I hoped. There's something I never had the courage to tell you while I was alive." The words blurred for a moment as tears welled in my eyes. Melissa placed a hand on my arm. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I nodded, though my heart was racing. The letter continued. "When I was younger, before we met, I made a mistake. I fathered a child I never told you about. A boy. His mother passed away, and I arranged for him to be adopted by a good family. I never tried to find him, afraid it would destroy us. But lately, I've wondered if keeping this secret has already done that. Forgive me if you can." The room went silent. The sound of hammers and drills outside felt distant, muffled. Ethan was the first to speak. "Dad had another son?" I swallowed hard. "Apparently." Melissa took the photograph from the box. It showed my husband in his 20s, holding a baby. The resemblance was undeniable. Ethan sat down slowly, staring at the letter. "That means I have a brother somewhere." I folded the letter carefully, my hands trembling. "Yes, and it seems your father wanted us to know eventually." Melissa's eyes softened. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to forget it. But another part, Feels like this was meant to be found. Ethan nodded quietly. Maybe we should try to find him. Later that night, after the workers had gone home, I sat on the porch with the letter in my lap. The sunset painted the horizon in pink and gold, the same colors that had filled the sky the day my husband proposed. Melissa came outside, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. "You okay?" she asked softly. I sighed. He kept this secret his whole life. "I don't know if I'm angry or just sad for him." She handed me a cup. "Maybe it's both. But maybe this secret wasn't meant to hurt you. Maybe he wanted to give you, and Ethan, a chance to heal something unfinished." I looked at her, realizing how much she'd changed. There was no arrogance left in her voice. "Only compassion, you know," I said, smiling faintly. "You sound like the woman I always hoped you'd become," she chuckled. "And you sound like the mother I wish I'd had." The 2 of us sat there in silence, listening to the crickets, watching the light fade. Inside, the letter lay folded neatly on the kitchen counter, a bridge to a past that still held its mysteries, but for now, I wasn't afraid to face them. The next morning started with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of quiet determination. Ethan sat at the dining table with his laptop open, a dozen tabs visible, genealogy sites, old newspaper archives, social service databases. He looked focused in a way I hadn't seen since his father's passing. "Mom," he said without looking up, "I think I found a lead. There was a private adoption registered under Dad's name initials back in 1978. It's sealed, but the agency still exists." I poured coffee into his cup. "And what do we do now?" He finally looked up, his eyes bright. "We ask." Melissa walked in, hair still damp from her shower, a notebook in hand. "I already called the agency," she said, flipping a page. "They can't release identifying information without a court order, but they said the adoptee left a contact request last year. He's been looking for his biological family, too." I froze mid-step. "He's been looking for us?" Melissa nodded. "Yes, his name is David Ross." The name hit me like a soft thunderclap, strange, familiar somehow. "Did he leave an address?" Ethan shook his head. "No, just an email. I can send him a message today." I hesitated. "Maybe it's too soon, Ethan. What if this just opens old wounds?" "Mom," he said gently, "maybe it heals them instead." He was right. Secrets rot in silence. Truth breathes life back into broken things. That evening, Ethan sent the email. It was simple, honest. "Hello, David, my name is Ethan Miller. I believe we may share a father. He passed away several years ago, but recently we discovered a letter he left behind. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk." We didn't expect a reply so soon, but within an hour, the laptop chimed. "Ethan, I've been waiting for this message my whole life. Let's meet." My hands shook as Ethan read it aloud. Melissa gasped softly. That was fast. 2 days later, we met him at a quiet cafe downtown. The moment he walked in, my breath caught. He had the same eyes as my husband, sharp, gentle, knowing. He smiled awkwardly. "Mrs. Miller?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Please, call me Martha." He looked at Ethan. "Guess that makes us brothers." They shook hands, a brief moment heavy with meaning. Over coffee, David told us his story. He'd grown up in a small town, raised by loving adoptive parents who told him early on he was adopted. His father, a local teacher, had died when David was 17. His mother passed away last year. "That's when I started searching," he said. "I didn't want to find anyone for money or closure. I just wanted to know who I came from." His words were steady, sincere. I could see the honesty in his posture, the pain in his eyes that mirrored my husband's old melancholy. Ethan smiled softly. "You look like him," David chuckled. "Everyone says that when they see pictures." I asked carefully, "Did your adoptive mother ever mention our family's name?" He shook his head. "Just that my biological father was a good man who made a hard choice." Tears blurred my vision. For all the years I'd felt angry at my husband's secret, I suddenly understood the guilt that must have eaten at him. When we left the cafe, Melissa surprised me by pulling David into a hug. "Welcome to the family," she said warmly. For the next few weeks, David became part of our lives like he had always been there. He came to dinners, helped Ethan with the renovation, and even started learning our bakery recipes. He and Melissa laughed easily, a sibling comfort that grew quickly. One afternoon, as I was watering plants in the garden, Melissa came running out of the house, her phone in hand, her face pale. "Martha, you need to see this." She showed me an old photo on her screen, one David had sent earlier that morning from his childhood albums. In the picture, his adoptive father stood beside him, holding a fishing rod. But beside him was another man I recognized instantly. It was my husband. I took the phone, staring in disbelief. "This was taken at Clearwater Lake." Ethan came outside, hearing the commotion. "What's going on?" I handed him the phone. "That's your father. He visited David when he was a child." Ethan's eyes widened. "So he did know him." "He saw him," Melissa whispered. "He must have stayed in touch all these years." A rush of emotion hit me. Sadness, relief, forgiveness, all tangled together. My husband hadn't just abandoned that child. He'd made sure, quietly, secretly, that he was okay. That night, I sat by the fireplace reading his old letter again. Somehow it felt different now. The guilt in his words wasn't about hiding David. It was about not knowing how to make peace between two worlds. Melissa sat beside me and took my hand. "He wasn't a liar," she said softly. "He was a father trying to protect everyone." I smiled faintly. And somehow he succeeded. For the first time in years, I felt my heart settle, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. My family was whole again, even if it had taken decades. Ethan invited David and Melissa over for dinner that weekend. The house smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, and fresh rosemary, the kind of meal my husband used to love. I set the table with the old porcelain set we'd kept for special occasions, the same one from our 25th anniversary dinner. As the evening light filtered through the curtains, I couldn't help but feel a quiet warmth in the air. For years, my home had echoed with silence, grief, guilt, and unspoken memories. But now there was laughter. David was telling a story about the time he accidentally set his childhood backyard on fire while trying to grill hot dogs. Melissa was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Even Ethan, usually so serious, looked like a boy again. "Dad would have loved this," Ethan said suddenly, raising his glass. "He would have wanted all of us here together." David smiled, but then his expression softened. "Actually, I think he did." We all looked at him. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, aged envelope, the paper yellowed and soft around the edges. "I found this last week in a box my adoptive mom kept. It was labeled with your name, Mrs. Miller. I wasn't sure if I should show it right away." He slid it across the table toward me. My breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable, strong, elegant, and achingly familiar. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a folded letter, dated June 3rd, 1984, the year after David was born. "Martha, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage I've been too much of a coward to have in person. I made a mistake, not in helping a child, but in keeping you in the dark. You were building your dream, our bakery, and I told myself I was protecting you from pain. But I see now, I only planted it deeper. David's mother was someone I once helped when we were both too young and too poor to think straight. When she passed, I couldn't turn away from the baby she left. I found him a home, a good one, but I could never stop checking in from afar. Every birthday, every school photo, every little success, I watched from the edges of his life. I never told you because I didn't want you to feel betrayed. I just wanted to make sure he never felt abandoned the way I once did as a boy. I hope one day, when I'm gone, you'll understand that love doesn't always look like honesty. Sometimes it looks like quiet protection. Forgive me, my heart." Richard, my tears fell before I could stop them. I read it again and again until the ink blurred. The man I'd resented for his silence hadn't been hiding infidelity. He'd been hiding mercy. He had carried a secret out of guilt, not deceit. Ethan's hand found mine. "He wasn't perfect," he said, "but he never stopped trying to protect us." David looked down at the tablecloth, his voice breaking. "I think he was trying to protect me too. I always wondered why a stranger would send birthday cards every year with no return address." My heart twisted. That was him. Melissa wiped her tears. He was loving both families the only way he knew how. For a while, none of us spoke. We just sat there, surrounded by the echo of love, messy, flawed, but undeniably real. Later that night, after David and Melissa had gone home, Ethan and I stood outside on the porch. The moonlight spilled across the yard, silvering the garden fence. "Mom," he said, "I think you should forgive yourself too." I looked at him, confused. For what? For holding on to pain that wasn't yours to carry. He was right. For years I had been angry, not just at my husband, but at myself, for not seeing what he had silently endured. For mistaking his guilt for betrayal. I turned my gaze toward the stars. "You know," I said softly, "your father once told me that love is just another word for patience." Ethan smiled. "Then I guess he's still teaching us." The days that followed felt lighter. David began helping at the bakery on weekends, learning how to knead dough and shape pastries the way I taught Ethan years ago. Customers adored him. They said he had Richard's calm hands, the kind that made everything taste like home. Sometimes I'd catch David standing near the photo wall, the one filled with family pictures from decades past. He'd linger near an old snapshot of Richard holding baby Ethan in the bakery's first kitchen. And every time he'd whisper, "He really was my father." It wasn't guilt that stayed in the house anymore. It was peace. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight pouring through the curtains and the faint hum of the bakery downstairs. The smell of cinnamon and coffee drifted up the staircase, but it wasn't me who had started baking. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw David and Ethan working side by side, laughing as they burned a batch of croissants. For a moment, I just stood there, watching them. Two men who had started as strangers were now moving in rhythm like they had baked together their whole lives. And maybe, in a way, they had, through Richard's love that had quietly tied their lives together long before they ever met. "Good morning," I said softly. Ethan turned with a grin. "Morning, Mom. We thought we'd let you sleep in for once." David smiled shyly, his hands covered in flour. "We were trying to surprise you with breakfast, but..." He lifted the tray of half-burned pastries. "We might need a little more practice," I chuckled, taking a bite of the least charred one. "It's perfect," I said. "Because you made it." We sat together at the counter, drinking coffee, talking about everything and nothing. And for the first time since Richard's death, the silence in the house didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful, like a pause between heartbeats. After breakfast, Ethan went to the market, leaving David and me to clean up. As he wiped the counter, his eyes drifted to a worn wooden box on the shelf. "Is that one of your husband's old toolboxes?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, Richard used to fix everything himself. He said if your hands can make something, you should never let them forget how." David picked up the box gently and opened it. Inside were tools, an old photograph of the three of us at the bakery's opening day, and, beneath the photo, a small sealed envelope. The handwriting was Richard's again. This time it was addressed to "my sons." David froze. "Do you want me to open it?" My heart pounded. "Yes," I whispered. He carefully tore the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dear boys, if you're reading this, it means time has done what it always does. It's taken me forward and brought you together. I never thought I'd be lucky enough to call two men my sons, but here you are, standing in the same house where I dreamed of a family that could forgive me. I made many mistakes. But I built this bakery not as a business, but as a promise. Every loaf that rose, every pastry that sold, it was all for you two to have something solid to stand on, even when I wasn't here. You'll find a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. It holds the deed to the bakery and my savings. Half belongs to Ethan, the other half to David. Because blood isn't just what runs through our veins. It's what we choose to share. Take care of your mother. She carried more weight than I ever deserved to give her. And remember, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pain. With love, always." Dad David's voice trembled as he finished. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy. He left half the bakery to me?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Because he saw you as family long before we did." Ethan returned moments later, holding a bag of fresh bread, and we handed him the letter. He read it quietly, then looked at David and smiled. "Guess we're officially brothers now." David laughed through tears. "Yeah, I guess we are." They hugged, and I could almost see Richard standing beside them. smiling that quiet, proud smile of his. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we locked up the bakery together. The sign above the door still read, "Miller's Bread and Soul." But beneath it, we added a small plaque that said, "A family recipe, forged in love." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I'd lost a husband. I felt like I had gained another son, a fuller heart, and a home that finally lived up to its name. Sometimes healing doesn't come as a miracle. It comes as laughter over burned croissants and a letter left behind by a man who never stopped loving in his imperfect way. The day of the bakery's reopening ceremony arrived, with golden morning light streaming through the windows. The scent of fresh bread and sugar filled the air, carrying memories of laughter, pain, and rebirth. Martha stood in front of the counter, wearing the same apron she had worn the day she and Richard opened this place decades ago. Only now, the fabric was patched and worn, softened by time and tears. Ethan was hanging the last of the new signs outside, while David adjusted the trays of pastries. People were already gathering outside, curious about the small-town bakery that had somehow survived tragedy and come back stronger. When Martha stepped outside, applause rippled through the crowd. She wasn't expecting it. For years, she'd lived quietly, almost invisible in her grief. But now, she saw faces that had once pitied her, smiling with admiration instead. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "This bakery has been through so much, and so have we. But what I've learned is that no storm, no betrayal, no loss can destroy something built on love." Ethan came to stand beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. David joined on her other side, holding a loaf of the bakery's signature bread. Martha continued softly, "When my husband Richard passed, I thought I'd lost everything. But in truth, he left behind something greater than I ever realized. A family that keeps growing, even in the face of pain." She looked at David and smiled gently. "Family isn't about who you share blood with. It's about who stays when your heart is breaking." The crowd clapped again, but it was David's turn to step forward. He cleared his throat, holding the loaf in both hands. "I never knew my father well," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But through this bakery, through the warmth of these ovens and the people inside, I've finally met the man he really was. And I've met the family I never thought I'd have." Ethan pulled him into a hug, and the crowd cheered softly. It wasn't loud or showy. It was the kind of applause that feels like home. After the speech, customers poured in, buying pastries and sharing hugs. The bakery that once echoed with loneliness now overflowed with voices, laughter, and life. Later, when the rush quieted, Martha stood behind the counter watching Ethan and David work. The way they moved together reminded her of Richard. The way his hands had always known just how long to knead the dough, just when to take the bread out of the oven. She closed her eyes, whispering softly, "You did it, Richard. You brought them together." That evening, when the bakery lights dimmed and the closed sign went up, the three of them sat by the window with cups of tea and slices of the first loaf they'd baked that morning. "Mom," Ethan said quietly. "I think Dad would have been proud." Martha smiled faintly. "He is. I can feel it every time the oven hums." David nodded. "He's here, in every loaf, every smile that walks through that door." Outside, the streetlights flickered to life. The world felt still, peaceful. For the first time in years, Martha didn't dread the night. She felt a quiet warmth inside her chest, not the burning ache of loss, but the steady glow of something whole again. And as she looked at her two sons, one by birth, one by love, she realized that grief had finally baked into gratitude. The recipe of her life was complete.